Right. Okay, well, I'll get started then. So, yep, as Karen explained, my background is in mathematics, and the focus of my research is in topics such as signal processing and machine learning. And I'd like to give a very brief overview of what we're doing with our clinical research partners to introduce things like commodity smartphones into clinical practice in neurological disorders. So the overall aim here is that, much as other speakers have been talking about, is that there are these incredible devices for doing.
Sorry, Max, for interrupting. Maybe you can just lean a little forward to your microphone because it's still a little difficult to hear you.
Okay, hang on.
I think that will help a bit.
Let me see. Is that better? Hello?
I think it is.
That's better, is it? Okay, right. So yeah, well, me and my research partners are just interested in trying to look at many different aspects of neurological disorders, but we want to try to basically turn commodity smartphones and other devices that people already have on them into serious tools for symptom measurement. This is because if you look at the number of difficulties that exist in trying to measure diseases like Parkinson's or other cerebellar disorders or Huntington's disease, which we're talking about now, then there are many problems with the existing infrastructure for collecting reliable data about symptom severity. And without that data, though, we can't really get good information about the effectiveness of new treatments yet. So what we want to do is we want to try to reduce practical difficulties in measurement of symptoms of diseases like Huntington's. And we're trying to improve the objectivity of measurement. So the way we see that is trying to improve the repeatability and reliability of symptom testing over and above those methods that are already in use. And we're also interested in trying to do high frequency measurement. In theory, we would like to get that down to minutes, if not higher frequency than that, but we'd be happy even if we have measurements that were objective on the hour-by-hour basis. And finally, what we want to do is to improve the quality and frequency of follow-up measurements in clinical trials, because as it stands, clinical trials don't really have high-quality, reliable information about the effectiveness of follow-up for various treatments. And what that means is that you either spend an awful lot of money on getting low-quality data, or you follow a few individuals and get lots of high-quality data, but it's very difficult to get high-quality data from a large number of individuals. This is what we're trying to do, trying to make that possible. So I'm going to talk in a little bit of detail then about how we go about trying to make smartphones do what we want them to do, for serious measurement of diseases. And what you have to understand is that smartphones, and also smartwatches these days as well, can be used in this way because of the fact that they have integrated sensing devices. For example, they might have accelerometers or gyroscopes and other sensing hardware, such as microphones or touchscreens. With that, we can implement specific test protocols. So, for example, if you want to measure someone's gait behavior, then what we can do is we can ask them to put the smartphone in their pocket and to walk around with it. And that way we can get quite reliable information about their gait patterns using these sensing devices. And what we've done is to write specialized Android software. As probably, as many of you know, about 80% of the market runs Android, so that opens up the possibility of being able to capture access to large numbers of individuals. And we can collect raw sensor data which reflects this movement under test protocols. And we're interested in measuring all sorts of different measurements of movement such as gait, tapping, reaction time, also interested in voice and posture and tremor, these kind of things that are of direct interest and direct importance to many neurological disorders. So this slide just gives you a very quick technical illustration of what it takes to actually get raw sensor data off a smartphone and process it by doing various manipulations to it to get at the signal that you're interested in. So these are plots of accelerometry data on the top left-hand side, and then we use some nonlinear smoothing algorithms by which we can identify things like the smartphone orientation. Because if you look at accelerometry data, then the gravitational orientation is actually mixed in with the signal in a way that's extremely hard to separate out from the actual acceleration due to movement that you care about. And then we do things like convert this into spherical coordinates and thereby identify, for example, gait behavior. Right? We can identify individual foot events, so we can identify when the foot is hitting the ground. And then the force and the timing of other attributes of these events is quite critical to understanding gait behavior. This is the kind of thing that we do. So it's quite sophisticated signal processing, but it's necessary in order to turn these signals into something that can be useful. So what I'm just going to go through a very small little pilot study that we did in Huntington's disease, and probably this cohort is way too small to draw much more conclusions on a more generalized sense about what we can do with this technology in Huntington's. We've done a lot more work in Parkinson's, but I wanted to talk about Huntington's because I thought it was a very interesting and different disease that I think brings up other issues that don't come up in Parkinson's. And so to test out this technology, so we ran a small pilot study in Rochester, New York. And here's the study cohort statistics. You can see that they have comparable ages, they have so-called comparable Montreal cognitive assessment scores, which is also important in Huntington's. And you can see there's on the right-hand side, you can see this measure called the UHDRS, which is Unified Huntington's Disease Rating Scale. And it can be boiled down to a number which tells you about movement impairment. Yeah? If that number's small, then it's good. If it's large, then it's not good. So you can get some idea about how someone's overall symptom severity is changing by looking at that number. And that's the UHDRS is really the state of the art of kind of current clinical measurements of Huntington's, unfortunately. And it takes an awful lot of time, and a lot of it is paper-based, or it involves movement tests being done in the clinic, and so it's expensive, it's time-consuming, and so it's very unlikely to be done on a regular basis, and very rarely is. But that's kind of the best we have at the moment, with an supposedly objective score of Huntington's symptom severity. So let's have a look at what we could do by processing the accelerometry data, for instance, that we captured during gait testing. So what you found on this slide, you can see, is that a simple measure of the unpredictability of the low frequency component, so if you're interested in signal processing, particularly about the frequency content of the signal. So this is really looking at the so-called stride frequency, so that's how regularly people, that's the pace someone's, I guess we call it gait cadence, and how regular that gait is, that gait pattern. We found that to be strongly correlated to the standard, a standard test which is called the 10-meter distance test. And interestingly, this feature, this unpredictability score, also strongly distinguished controls from HB patients, which you can see on the right-hand side. So we could get pretty good, we could pretty easily discriminate between people who had Huntington's and those who are healthy controls in this data set just by looking at this single gait impairment measure. measurement. And also, you can see that it's correlated to an existing standard measure. By no means perfect, but it just gives you some idea about what you can do. And then we also looked at balance. This is just testing posture, so your ability to be able to maintain a stable upright balance in a steady upright balance. And we extracted basically a measure of what you might call body-related acceleration magnitude. So you can think about it as a measurement of the severity of wobble when you're trying to balance. And that's actually an excellent measure for discriminating controls from HD subjects, as you can see in this slide. Another interesting test is looking at the touch screen. So we ask people to do tests by doing tapping on the smartphone touchscreen. And then what we look at is clusters of XY touchscreen coordinates that you can get with tapping of it. You get that about once every 50 times a second. You can get quite accurate information about how people's fingers are moving on the touchscreen. And we looked at measures of things like tap timing events, replacement statistics from clustering the touch events between the finger. And again with this, if you look at a simple measure of the irregularity in tapping time, when that's plotted against the accuracy of the position of the fingers on the buttons in this touch screen, these are together are actually a very useful couple of features for discriminating controls from HD. So that's looking at individual measures, and then what we want to do is we want to say, well, could we actually try to combine those measures in order to predict this things like this UHDRS score? So this current UHDRS score, it's not really practical to get that at home, and it's not practical to get it any other way than going to the clinic and going through a full test. So we wanted to see whether we could use the features that we extracted from the raw sensor signals that we got from the smartphone, and can we try to replicate this UHDRS score? And what we found is that a very simple so-called linear predictor, so there's nothing particularly complex, this isn't elaborate machine learning method, and using perhaps 2 or at most 5 of these features to replicate the total UHDRS within about 10 points. We can probably do a bit better than that, say maybe 7 points or so. So if you look at the total scale, that's probably about 10% of the full scale of error. That's the difference between what the commission would score and what our simple model would produce using just these features. So I have no idea whether that is particularly accurate or not, or even whether that is useful. But it's kind of interesting to show that you can combine these features together and replicate the existing clinical score for what it's worth. Okay, so I'll just end on this point. So to test out this idea that we could try to extend the work that we've done with Parkinson's, we've been able to show quite effectively that we can use smartphones to measure disease symptoms in Parkinson's, and we can work out when somebody someone's dosage, work out when someone's medication is not being effective, that kind of thing, or some of the work we're currently doing is looking at questions of whether we can pick up the symptoms of Parkinson's pre-diagnosis using similar kinds of technologies. And we made a lot of strides with that in Parkinson's. And we wanted to see if we could move that into other neurological disorders using this, and this is what this looks like. And so we looked at things like tapping, balance, and gait, and asked whether or not we could discriminate people with Huntington's from those that were healthy controls. And we could validate a standard walking test using this, and we could also get, I suppose you might say, an interesting level of accuracy in predicting this so-called clinical scale, this UHDRS scale that's used for measuring symptoms So I'd say this is really the first step towards using standard smartphones as a clinical tool in research and practice in Huntington's disease. And what I'm quite, obviously this is a very small study, so you can't draw very much of a generalizable conclusion. But I have, I'm optimistic. I think technology like this, we've shown it can work in things like Parkinson's. Others have looked at other disease areas, things like central nervous system disorders, such as bipolar disorder. And they've also shown some quite interesting results using the sensor data, the raw sensor data that you can capture from things like Android smartphones. And they've been able to show that you can also make predictions about clinical symptom severity. And we wanted to see if we can do this in disease like Huntington's, less well represented in. I think I'm optimistic that that's what we can do. So I'm optimistic about this technology as a tool for actually overcoming many of these problems that we face in clinical research, and doing it in a way that's as rigorous as possible, that's high quality, that gives us high quality information that we can rely upon. So I'll finish on that point.
Thank you so much. I think it's very clear studies you've done. It's nice to see that it can be done so simple. I wonder where you think that the potential will be in, like, should say 5 years. What do you hope that we can? Because of course now we can. I think it's quite clear that we can see identify these diseases, but how do you see that we can use it sort of more applied in the future?
Well, I think it's, as I said, the obvious thing is that currently it's extremely difficult to objectively measure symptoms of neurological disorders. And if a tool like this, if we can demonstrate in studies like this, and it has to be larger, obviously, but this is tantalizingly good signs, then how you could envisage using this technology is that basically it becomes a supplemental tool for giving information about symptom severity for many different forms of clinical practice and research. Yeah. So, if, for instance, let's say 5 years down the line, you could, clinical practice might work like this, which is that if you want to know, does someone have Parkinson's disease, then the doctor prescribes an app. This person it runs the app on their phone, they take it home, they put it in their pocket, and they go about their everyday activities for a week or so. And then they have an appointment, they come back in again, and the doctor basically has a dashboard that shows how this person's symptoms have been changing over time. It's between the point at which they were prescribed this app and the point at which they come back into their clinic again. And by looking at these traces of objective data, the clinician could make a decision about whether this is good information to support a diagnosis or not. And I think something like that as a supplemental tool for making diagnosis much more scientific is, I think, potentially very valuable. Because as it stands, although you can't say that clinical diagnosis is completely unscientific, it's also not really based on any kind of, it's also very rarely based on objective, repeatable, reliable information. Most of the time it's observational, particularly with neurological disorders, and those observational impressions are not necessarily repeatable. That, for example, if you take Parkinson's, then pretty much the agreement between a pathology and the diagnosis is only about 90%. So there are 10% of people who will be diagnosed with Parkinson's who show no pathological signs of the disease on autopsy when they die. So it's not clear what they had, but they appear to have all of the the observational things. It's just that without the actual objective data, we don't really. It's not evidence-based medicine. It's impressions, right? It's practice, but not necessarily science. And I think that's the point I'm trying to get at, is that tools like this, downright, the way I see it is that they can provide objective information that is scientific, and that we can then start to make good on the real promise of evidence-based medicine. And I think, there are many other areas that are, perhaps more trendy than evidence-based medicine, things like precision medicine. But the same pretty much goes for that. You can't have precision medicine until you can have precision measurement. And this is where I see these kind of tools going, is that they provide precision measurements to enable a future medical practice, or to enable a future form of medical research that doesn't really exist yet.
Can you imagine some kind of infrastructure that could support these types of innovations?
Well, I think we already have the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
All you need is smartphones and the internet.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
And the computing infrastructure to do it is already available. And in a way, it's trivial. A lot of the algorithms that I showed you, they're not particularly sophisticated. So it's not like you need deep neural networks or fantasy future AI to make this happen. It's doable right now.
Great.
So I think. Sure.
I just want to make sure that everyone are heard. So if anyone else wants to raise a question, the floor is open. Again, people are very quiet. So maybe I can raise a question to our panel or all of you. What do you think research infrastructure like the Human Brain Project should do in order to address societal challenges? Is this an important field of research? Should the HBP support this type of data or the new type of disease signatures? This is a question to all of you.
So could you clarify that question?
Yes. I was just wondering if you think that the Human Brain Project could also, because it's a lot about like machine learning, more heavy types of data collections. Like, would you see that there could also be an option like using smartphones like this could be a part of the project?
Well, I would say certainly if collecting data like this, I think one of the things you have to understand is that raw data that we collect from sensing devices, and that includes to a certain extent things like wearable fitness devices. Although the caveat with say wearable fitness devices is that they have this big problem in that they have an algorithmic intermediary between them. That is, companies who want to collect that data and only present it to you through their cloud platform and through non-transparent algorithms which they won't publish. But basically the hardware in these devices is pretty much the same as the kind of things that you get in a smartphone. or a smartwatch. But that doesn't mean that that data, that raw data, is really of any use for understanding its relationship to the brain, unless you have sophisticated or reasonably sophisticated ways of converting that information into something that is behaviorally meaningful. So I think as it stands, yes, you could certainly use these devices, but there's a big gap, really, which is the gap between what the sensor data means and what the turning that into something that's useful that could be used in the Human Brain Project. Because I sort of don't know things like, I mean, you could say the same thing about imaging in brain studies. Just the actual pictures themselves are not particularly interesting. It's how you turn those pictures into something that's meaningful, in terms of brain regions or how they interact with each other, that is useful. So yes, I think obviously all these devices could be used, but we have to understand their context.
Yeah.
And that's a complicated, huge research project that I would say most people have completely underestimated.
And maybe then with a good focus on how to integrate these data in the clinical practice, I guess.
Yes, I mean that. And then when you come to clinical practice, of course, there's another huge gap, which is that a lot of the research that goes on in engineering with these sorts of devices very rarely interfaces well with the clinical community. So they, in a way, the clinical community and engineering community talk completely different languages. And as it stands, there's very little effort to try to make those two things come together in a sensible way. I think it's something that you see. There isn't really the research infrastructure to make that happen. So they talk about things like, a lot of organisations talk about things like translational research, but that's probably more lip service than anything else. There's just not enough money in multidisciplinary research needed to make this happen, basically. So it's a long process. We're only really scratching the surface, and I don't think it's going to be. I don't think this is going to lead to revolutionary change, but I do think it's going to lead to incremental changes, which over time will accumulate and will probably start to change the field. But it's going to take a long time.
Yes, and with these words, maybe we should. I was trying to find my last slide, but I think I'll just say it briefly. Now we, as you said, have scratched the surface of self-tracking and how to use wearable devices and smartphones in neurology and healthcare. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. I guess that you must be tired and hungry, and I'll finish here, but I have your email address, so I will, as soon as we have the recordings, I will also send you the recordings. And if we have some news on this, you will also receive it. But thanks to all of our speakers. It was very interesting, and I'm sure that it will be shared a lot, at least internally in HPP. So I think that was all from here. You can find more on our website at the Danish Board of Technology, and also at HPP, of course. Thank you for today.